Truckers, what's the craziest, scariest, or most bizarre thing you experienced? I used to work with an ex-trucker who once had a woman commit suicide by jumping in front of his truck. He hasn't driven since, and now spends some time working with troubled/suicidal people. He was never quite the same after that happened. Edit. She had left a suicide note in her house. She had a history of depression. The family didn't want to sue or anything. They said they felt terrible for him that she chose to go that way and didn't want to put him through anymore. They actually said they were glad she was no longer in pain.
That's a heavy story. It's hard to imagine dealing with something like that. It's interesting how he turned it around to help others. Guess some people find purpose in their pain. It's tough, but you can see the change in him. The family's reaction is surprising too, showing a lot of strength. Life can throw some really dark moments at us, but some find a way to make a difference.
Driving up to college for the first time, my mom got tired and wanted to pull over for a nap at a truck stop. While she slept, I people watched. A huge truck pulled up, one of those tricked out, well-lit and super shiny trailers, and a big, tattooed driver climbed out. Then he leaned back in to pull something out. It was a kitten, a tiny little white kitten. He played with that kitten on the truck stop benches for so long, happy as could be, giggling and smiling like I would have. It was the cutest juxtaposition I've ever seen.
That's a pretty nice moment. It shows that you can't judge a book by its cover. This tough guy, all tattoos and big truck, just having a sweet time with a kitten. Makes you think about how unexpected things can be, you know? People can surprise you. Sometimes, it's those little moments that stick with you the most when you look back. Just a reminder to keep an open mind.
Not a trucker, but on the highway going from Maine to Killington, Vermont, I saw a large bird swoop down right in front of the semi-truck. While I didn't see the bird come out on the other side, I was preparing to see feathers everywhere and a carcass to come bouncing out from under the trailer. Nothing. As I passed the truck, I looked over and saw a terrified turkey standing between the cab and the trailer like he was surfing. After a couple miles, I did get the driver to pull over.
That's a wild scene. It's not every day you see a turkey having a close call like that. I can imagine the driver was just as surprised as you were. It's good you got him to pull over. Hope the turkey made it out okay. Sometimes these unexpected moments on the road can stick with you. Makes you appreciate the little things in life, like a turkey's luck.
My brother-in-law was a trucker for many years. He took his stepson, my sister's son, with him on one run. They were somewhere in the rural South and hit a power/telephone line that was too low across the road. It seems hard to believe, but it actually yanked one of the telephone poles out of the ground, and it crashed through the passenger window and out the windshield and stuck there. Neither of them were seriously hurt. My nephew just got a few minor scratches for flying glass.
That's a pretty wild story. Just imagine driving along, and suddenly a telephone pole comes crashing through. Glad they both came out okay, though. Minor scratches are way better than the alternative. It's moments like that which make you appreciate safety on the road. You never really know what's going to happen out there. A trucker's life is definitely full of unexpected twists.
Broker here with a light-hearted story. We had a driver who delivered a truckload of cookies for us. When he got a delivery, the receiver called us and said everything was fine except the driver ate like 5 cases, not boxes, cases of the cookies. It was a pain in the ass to deal with at the time, but looking back, I can just imagine this guy showing up covered in crumbs, asking for a glass of milk.
That's a good one. I can totally picture that driver, just covered in cookie crumbs, like a kid after a sweets binge. It's funny how things like that make for the best stories later on. At the moment, it probably felt frustrating, but now it's just a laugh. Sometimes those little mishaps end up being the highlight of the day. Cookies and milk do sound tempting though.
My grandma turns 100 in June this year. Likes to tell this story about my grandfather. They owned a farm and would deliver produce all over. Grandpa would load up a truck, I'm guessing something like a big 2-ton flatbed, and make deliveries from their home in southeastern Minnesota to Milwaukee, Madison, but most notably Chicago. During Prohibition, while making a big delivery to Chicago, he got stopped by a bunch of gangsters in the city, held at gunpoint while they made sure he wasn't hauling moonshine. When they confirmed it was just produce, he was allowed to go on his way. Turns out they were Al Capone's men.
That's quite a story about your grandfather. Imagine being stopped like that, just delivering veggies. It's interesting how life back then intersected with history in such unexpected ways. Prohibition brought out some wild situations. It's kind of cool to think about the everyday people who found themselves in the middle of all that chaos. Your grandma must have some interesting stories from that time.
Pulled over to stay the night near the Arizona Welcome Center on I-40. I hear a light knocking on my door. An old lady wearing nothing but an oversized sweatshirt is standing outside. I roll down my window and ask what's up. In the tiniest, creepiest little voice, she says that there's something in her car making a weird noise and that she needs help with it. I didn't help her.
That sounds pretty unsettling. I'd probably react the same way. It's one of those situations where you don't want to get involved, especially with someone who seems off. Better to stay safe than sorry. Just some strange stuff happening in the middle of nowhere, you know? Sometimes it's best to just drive away and forget about it.
I'm not a trucker, but I was listening to Z100 radio show, and they were talking about a video of a guy who was caught masturbating to porn while driving, and then a trucker called in and said that he's seen so many people doing that, men and women, because truckers are so high up they can see everything you're doing in your car.
That's a wild story. I mean, you don't expect to hear about that on a radio show. It's interesting how truckers have this unique perspective on the road. You would think people would keep it private, but I guess not everyone is aware of their surroundings. It's a reminder that what you do in your car might not be as private as you think. Just takes one too many curious eyes on the highway.
Dad's a trucker. Anyway, one night my dad was driving about a mile behind a guy who knew. He got on his radio and told the guy to be careful around the curve. It was really sharp and had a blind bend. He got back at you all right. When he got to the curve, the other guy's semi was in the ditch. He got to the straightaway, parked, and rushed back to help the guy. When he got there, the steering wheel was through the guy's chest. His organs were everywhere. TLDR's steering wheel went through a guy's chest during a crash.
That's a rough story. It's crazy how quickly things can go wrong on the road. Trucker life involves a lot of risks, and that kind of scene can really stick with a person. You never know when something tragic might happen, even when you're just doing your job. It's a reminder to always stay alert and look out for each other out there.
To add a happy story, a friend's brother was a trucker. He had a car drive up next to him and throw a pillowcase in front of his truck, thinking there might be something in it that would pop his tires. Apparently this happens somewhat regularly. He avoids it and pulls over to remove it from the road so it doesn't cause any accidents. Turns out it was full of kittens. All of them survived, and he actually kept the kitten, and it became his travel buddy for the remainder of his trucking career. Edit words.
That's an interesting story. It's nice to see someone take the time to help out on the road. Instead of getting mad, he actually did something good. The kitten must have been a great companion. Pretty cool how something like that can change the dynamic of a job. I guess it shows that sometimes unexpected things can lead to positive results. He probably had some memorable trips with that little buddy.
My squad leader told me about this one time when the truck in front got hit by an IED, and due to the risk, they had to leave them and reverse out of the area. An RPG hit them as they reversed. It didn't do much damage, so they continued. After about 2 hours of reversing tight mountain roads, they almost drove right off the cliff. Everyone got out, and one guy took the risk of getting all the trucks further down, so that only one guy got killed if the truck would fall down. Everyone calls him Cliffy now, and he received a medal but declined. Instead, he asked it to be given to the wife of the guy who hit the IED. He didn't make it. Cliffy quit 5 weeks ago and now works at a gas station.
That's pretty intense. It really shows how people step up in tough situations. Cliffy sounds like a solid guy for putting others first, especially the way he handled the medal. It's wild how those moments stick with you. Moving on to a gas station job after all that is a big shift, but sometimes you just need a different pace. Life can be strange like that.
Last year, my in-laws, who team drive a truck, had a head-on collision that killed the other driver. It was a 2-lane highway, and the other driver pulled out to pass. Rather than move back into his lane, when he saw there wasn't enough time, he doubled down and sped up. My in-laws veered on to the shoulder to avoid him. He moved to the shoulder too. My in-laws put their truck into the ditch, and so did the other driver. They hit head-on in the ditch hard enough to tear the engine out of their semi-truck. It was almost like the other guy was trying to kill himself. Thankfully, the RCMP explained to them that when drivers are faced with something like this, they tend to stare at the hazard and instinctively steer towards what they're looking at. Bonus fact, they were hauling explosives that thankfully did not explode.
That's a wild story. It's really messed up how some drivers react in tense situations. Your in-laws had to be really shaken up by that. Not to mention, hauling explosives and going through something like that is no small thing. I'm glad they made it out okay. It's one of those reminders about how critical it is to stay calm on the road. Driving can be unpredictable.
A friend was driving a big tanker to a factory. From far off he sees 2 lines of cars lined on both sides of the road in difficult bend, and among them there's a huge bunch of reindeer. The people were out of their cars and taking photographs. It was slippery as hell in the middle of the winter, and he knows that he leans on the brakes his trailer will sigh through the outer side of the bend, taking the cars, people, and their kids with it. Only thing he can do is aim the whole thing between the car lines and hope the people get out of the way. For a moment, the only thing he sees is reindeer flying everywhere. One airborne reindeer totaled a car, but nobody was hurt. People got really mad and needed a cop to explain how close they had been to being smacked like bugs.
That day was intense for my friend. Driving a big tanker, he spotted a bunch of people snapping photos of reindeer in a slippery bend. With cars all around, he knew hitting the brakes was a bad idea. Instead, he aimed the rig between the lines. It ended with reindeer flying and one car getting wrecked. People were furious, but luckily, no one got hurt. A close call for sure.
My dad was working as a driver that would just do short runs for different companies whenever they needed someone bad. He got called to run a truck out to some research facility. I honestly forget where. I was like 8. He gets there, and the trailer has a reverse set to freezing. He's given very specific instructions. Don't stop. If you break down, call this hashtag immediately. Any problems? Call this hashtag. Blah blah. He said it felt like he was on a secret mission. They didn't tell him what exactly was in the truck, but he knew it didn't weigh anything. He gets to where he's going, and they unload. It was fucking bodies. Like when you donate your bodies to science. He claims there was only 2 in the entire trailer. I don't know if it's true or not, but he would have no reason to lie about it.
That's an interesting story. Your dad sounds like he was in a unique situation. Running a truck and not knowing exactly what was inside must have been strange for him. The whole secret mission vibe adds to it. It's definitely something to think about, especially with the bodies included. Makes you wonder how often stuff like that happens and what else is out there that we don't know about.
One of my favorite stories of my grandpa. He was always known as being a badass like all grandpas are. So my grandpa was a trucker after Vietnam. He got a flat, and when he went to change it, he couldn't get one of the lug nuts off, and he put his whole strength into trying to get it off. He tried so hard, he broke the tire iron, and when it broke, the tire iron hit his shin, breaking his leg in half. The bone was sticking out and stuff too. The time was near midnight, and there were barely any cars on the road, so he had to throw rocks at traffic until someone stopped and took him to the hospital.
That's a wild story. Your grandpa really pushed through a tough situation. It's crazy how one moment can turn into a serious ordeal. The way he had to get people's attention by throwing rocks says a lot about his determination. I can't imagine the pain he must have been in, but he managed to get help. It's impressive how resilient folks can be, especially in unexpected circumstances.
My favorite was a story I was told about a guy driving in Germany with a girl in the passenger seat, frowned upon, but you can get away with it. Also, she was a friend, not a hooker, when she decides she will lay in the bed. Now that's illegal since if the truck crashes, there's no safety belt. The bed was above the cabin. A few minutes later, the driver misses a roadwork and crashes the truck on the right front side. Passenger seat gone. Girl saved her life.
That's an interesting story. It's wild to think how a simple decision can lead to such a close call. The whole idea of bending the rules like that adds a layer of tension. I guess sometimes you're just lucky. It's a reminder to always think about safety first, even if it seems fine at the moment. Glad she made it out okay, though.
Delivering in Compton. Yes, that Compton. And witnessing a rather slow, meandering police chase involving an obviously chemically altered man in a stolen backhoe. And not sure he knew exactly how to drive it, but he, seemingly unintentionally, kept running into objects and parked cars and seemed surprised every time. Went on for about 10 minutes.
That sounds wild. Delivering in a place like Compton must come with some surprises. A guy in a stolen backhoe causing chaos is definitely not something you see every day. It's almost like he didn't realize he was in a big machine, just doing his own thing. Just another day in the life, I guess, watching a guy drive recklessly and not have a clue about what's happening around him.
I was the passenger for this, but on a long drive I accompanied my mom on we saw a man standing on the concrete divider at about 10 p.m. It was fall, so it was dark out and pouring rain. He was dressed as a jester, and it was on a stretch of poorly lit highway. She flinched and asked if I saw it. I said that I did, and we watched as he walked slowly along the divider with his arms out a little to the sides. She pulled over because she was freaking out so bad, and he started doing weird stuff, cartwheels and handstands and shit. Weirdest thing ever.
That's definitely a strange encounter. I can't imagine how jarring it must have been to see someone like that in the rain at night. Just standing there in a jester costume adds to the creepiness. Your mom's reaction sounds pretty relatable. It's one of those moments where you just don't know what to think. I mean, who does cartwheels on a highway at night? It's one of those things that sticks with you.
Buried, I know, but I stopped for a refill on my coffee at the 414 in Quebec. Backed into a spot, and in front of me was a livestock hauler. Well, they had stopped and opened the back, and out came one goat. 53-foot trailer hired to transport one goat for 600 miles. The goat was cute as hell, and they had taken him out to play with him. And yes, I got to play with him as well. I tend to keep to myself at truck stops, being a girl and all.
That's a wild situation. A whole big rig just for one goat is surprising. It's cool they took the time to let him out and play. I get why you'd feel a bit out of place at truck stops, but it's nice you got to share that moment. Goats can be pretty friendly. It's good to see people connecting, even in unusual places.
My dad has worked for North America's biggest hauling companies. Can't remember which one he's with now. Whoops, primarily in safety departments. Obligatory, not me, but still relevant disclaimer. The most harrowing story he ever told me was about a trucker passing through Texas who got into a brutal accident. Fell asleep. His vehicle crushed the victim's car nearly entirely, clear from the wreckage alone that there were no survivors. He phones his on-call safety contact, my dad, who gets emergency services there as fast as he can. One responding deputy gets a nasty shock. It's his family's car. The victims were his wife and mother.
That's a heavy story. It really puts things in perspective. Accidents like that can take a toll on everyone involved, especially when it hits home. Your dad must have seen a lot of tough situations in safety, and that one clearly stands out. It's a reminder of how unexpected things can happen on the road. Makes you think about the real lives behind those incidents.
The howling trailers comes to mind. There's a dog food distribution plant in Flagstaff, Arizona. They require you to drop your trailer's doors open. It is always windy in Flagstaff. At night, in their dimly lit parking lot, all I heard was the evil howl of the wind passing over the open trailers. It was similar to the noise that you make when blowing over a soda bottle, except 1,000 times louder as the chilling wild wind blows through you. I'm not very religious, I'm not very superstitious, but for the 15 minutes I was dropping and hooking, my heart was pounding and I was looking over my shoulder.
That sounds pretty intense. I've had similar experiences at night when you hear the wind and it feels like something's watching you. Just a couple of years ago, I was parked in a dark area waiting for my next load. Every little sound made my heart race. You start imagining things. I wasn't really scared, just alert. It's funny how just the environment can play tricks on your mind.
Not me, but my uncle. He drives a garbage truck, family business. One day, a labeling company mislabeled a giant box of lighters. No big deal, right? They just put the box out with their regular trash. When he ran the compactor, the back of the truck burst into flames. He had to empty several tons of burning trash into the street so the fire department could put out.
That's a wild story. Just imagine the scene. My uncle dealing with a flaming trash truck in the middle of the street. He said it was chaos. Firefighters everywhere, people staring. It was a long day for him. At least no one got hurt, and they got the fire out. Definitely a memorable shift for him, though not something you'd want to deal with regularly. Just goes to show, you never know what's in the trash.
My dad has been a long-haul driver since he was 18 years old. He told me once of a time he witnessed a multiple car pileup where one car was trapped by a truck and caught fire. My dad didn't speak much about details, but the look on his face when he told me he watched the person in the car burn to death and everyone around was powerless to help really puts his experience into perspective.
That's a heavy story. It must be tough for him to carry that memory. Long-haul drivers see a lot on the road, not just the good stuff. It makes you think about how different their experiences can be compared to what most people imagine. It sounds like he's seen some serious stuff that really changes your outlook on life.
Stopped at a rest stop around 4 a.m. outside of Chicago. Not an oasis, but an actual rest stop. Must have been at least 20 toilets in the place, if not more. I'm the only guy doing my duty in this gigantic room of toilets, and about a minute later someone else comes in, sits in the stall right next to mine, and starts tapping his foot rhythmically. I still have some denial, but I think the guy wanted something from me.
That sounds like an awkward situation. It's always strange when you're in a private moment, and then someone else comes in and seems to be too close for comfort. It's probably just my imagination, but you start to wonder what people are thinking. I get how that can make you feel uneasy. Just a weird bathroom experience, I guess.
My dad has hit many things in his years. Dozens of deer, coyotes, a mountain lion, a bald eagle. But the weirdest was he ran over a naked, dead guy in the middle of winter miles away from civilization. He called Highway Patrol, and they explained that there was a guy on meth that had been reported missing for a couple hours, and that they're sending an ambulance to pick him up, but because of the weather, it was taking the ambulance longer than expected to get to him.
That's a really odd story. It's not every day you hear about someone running into a situation like that. I guess it shows how unpredictable life can be. Your dad must have been pretty shocked. I wonder what the other drivers on the road thought when they heard about it. Just another day, right? It's wild to think about the stuff we don't know happening out there in the world.
Not me, but my friend that is a trucker. He says scariest thing that has happened to him was he was driving through Chicago. He figures sometime around 10 or 11 p.m. and what he describes as a hooker jumped out in the middle of the road in front of him. He started to slow down and then realized two males, one on either side of the road, running to his truck with what he says baseball bats. He said fuck it and put his foot to the floor, and the hooker just barely moved out of the way of Ho's truck, and he just kept going.
That's a tense situation. Your friend was in a pretty dangerous spot. Makes you think about how quickly things can change on the road. It's wild that he had to decide between stopping or just speeding through. At least nothing happened to him. Driving those long hauls can be unpredictable, especially in places like Chicago late at night. I guess he learned to be more alert after that.
Not a trucker, but my friend and I were behind a truck pickup that appeared to have just bought a recliner. It was a ways ahead of us because he was speeding quite a bit, but the recliner flew out of the back of the truck completely out of nowhere and rolled a bit and then slid to a stop. The truck driver seemed to acknowledge that it flew out because he slammed on his brakes, but after slowing down a bit, he just continued and apparently said, fuck it. We pulled over and grabbed the chair. It was a great chair for about 4 years. It was scuffed up a bit and leaned to the left slightly, but otherwise great. Edit, not a trucker, and spelling error. Still the weirdest thing I've witnessed on the road.
That's quite the story. A recliner just flying out like that is wild. It's cool you and your friend went after it. 4 years of use from a free chair sounds like a solid deal. It's funny how some unexpected moments can lead to something useful. Most people would just drive past it, but you took action. Not every day you find furniture on the road, I guess.
My good family friend is a truck driver, and he told us a story about one of his co-workers. The co-worker, was driving early in the morning, and I can't remember the details exactly, but he dozed off a little or lost control or something due to his exhaustion and crashed over the side of the road into a ditch. Fortunately, nobody was around to get hurt, but unfortunately, nobody was around to see the crash. The driver was passed out, but still alive, and when he came to, he found part of his scalp had been cut from the top and was hanging off his head. He proceeded to get out trying to literally hold his head together and went up to the road and just started walking. He had lost a lot of blood and didn't really know what he was doing, so he was just shambling down the freeway, covered in blood, so nobody really stopped to help him. Fortunately, some people saw the wrecked truck after a while, but found no body, so they searched and eventually found him some ways down the road. The guy was rushed to the hospital and survived with something like 133 staples in his head.
Wow, that's intense. It's crazy how quickly things can go south, especially when you're tired. The fact that he was able to walk after all that is kind of wild. You'd think someone would notice him earlier, but I guess people don't always pay attention. It's good he got help in time. 133 staples is a serious number, though. I can't imagine what that recovery must have been like.
What was funny scary, but I was driving across OK late at night on I-40, and it was during that short period when Art Bell was on XM radio. Now I'm the biggest skeptic in the world about that kind of subject, but I love a good spooky story. So Art's guests were these guys who go into graveyards and set up recorders and then say there's voices of the dead in the static. They were playing these voices of dead children they had recorded, and it was the creepiest thing I had ever heard in my life. Suddenly the biggest skunk I have ever seen in my life walked into the road in front of my truck, and I screamed like a little girl. Then I ran over the skunk. The scream and the stink woke up my cod river in the bunk, and he came out thinking it was some kind of major disaster. Took 3 weeks for the smell to go away.
That's a pretty wild story. Driving late at night can mess with your head, especially with creepy stuff on the radio. Hearing those ghostly voices and then having a huge skunk appear out of nowhere must have been quite the shock. Your reaction makes total sense. And 3 weeks for the smell to clear? That's pretty rough. Sounds like a memorable drive for sure.
Not a trucker, but once on a truck stop, saw this guy flip over his car on the road, got out of it and came to us all bleeding. At first he offered us money to take him to a next city. After we saw he needed to go to the hospital. He started asking us for money for a cab or a bus. We were like, WTF? First he offered us cash, and now he is asking us. Scary as shit. And this was during nighttime. He was really in a hurry.
That sounds pretty wild. I can't imagine seeing someone flip their car like that. The whole situation must have felt tense, especially with him bleeding and trying to get help. It's strange how quickly he went from offering money to asking for it. You never really know how people will react in those moments. Good call on telling him he needed to go to the hospital though. Safety first, no doubt.
And not a truck driver or anything, but I felt bad for the person who was. I was going down a steep hill on my bike, and I fell on my bike and skid underneath an oncoming logging truck. I just played down on the pavement and hoped for the best. I got back up just fine and found my bike and everything, but never saw the guy again.
That sounds intense. I imagine it was pretty scary being so close to that truck. You must have had a lot going through your mind in that moment. It's good you got back up and found your bike. That must have felt like a relief. It's wild how quickly things can change when you're just riding. Glad you're okay though.
My dad was a trucker. He was apparently a good man, but I didn't really know him. The first time I ever met him was on a long-haul road trip across the U.S. that my mom arranged so I could get to know him. The bizarre thing was, he was actually a world-famous arm wrestling champion. We bonded throughout the trip as he competed in regional competitions in preparation for the World Championships in Las Vegas. Spoiler alert, he won, and now we are best friends forever.
That's an interesting story. Meeting your dad on the road must have been quite the experience. The fact that he was a world champion in arm wrestling adds a unique twist. It's cool that you got to bond over something so intense. That must have created some solid memories for both of you. Now being best friends is a nice ending to that journey. Sounds like a meaningful connection.
My father was a truck driver for years. He told me about a time he pulled into a truck stop and noticed another truck that had stopped, and the driver was sleeping but was still in the driver's seat. So my dad turned off his headlight and quietly parked his truck head-on to the other truck about 10 feet away. My dad then hit the air horns and turned on his light's high beam. So when a sleeping person woke up, he thought he fell asleep while driving and was about to have a head-on. Scared the shit out of him. I would have killed my dad if he did that. But they thought it was a great joke.
That's classic dad humor right there. It's wild how a little prank can create such a big reaction. I can't imagine waking up like that, thinking you're in danger. It's a good reminder of how different people's senses of humor can be. Some might find it funny, while others would just be annoyed. I guess it's all in good fun for them, but I know I would have been furious.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.